dijital ve robotik kodlamayı deneyimlemelerine olanak sağlamak için TEGEV var gücüyle çalıştı, çalışmaya devam ediyor. Şimdi konumuz STEM, STEAM, FETEM, Maker hareketi, artık adına ne dersek, hepimiz bunu duyduk. Bir de Tinkering hareketi var. Tinkering, kurcalamak, deneme yanılma ile bir şeyler üretmek anlamına geliyor. Tinkering, Saskia'nın da bahsettiği gibi, Saskia ve Mariana'nın konstrüktivizm sanat akımından esinlenen bir yaklaşım. Konstrüktivizmde makine ve insan bilincini sentezleyerek faydalı ve kullanılabilir malzemelerle yeni bir ürün ortaya çıkarmak demek. Bu konuda bize çok güzel bir sunum yapacak olan Ryan Jenkins'i çağırmak istiyorum. I'd like to invite Ryan on stage. And here comes Ryan. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we are too. We are delighted to have you here. In his talk, Ryan Jenkins of wonderful idea company that he co-founded, he will share reflections from traveling to different museums, schools, and maker spaces around the world to lead tinkering workshops. He will respond to a common question of how can this work here with examples of varied learning environments that support the development of a tinkering mindset for students, parents, and educators. Ryan, stage is all yours. We are really looking forward to your presentation.
Great. Thanks, Devrim, and thanks so much for inviting me to participate in this conference. I'm just going to share my screen so I can show some photos and videos. Great. So I know that all of you are passionate and excited about providing learning experiences for your students to deeply engage with subjects like math, science, engineering, and technology. And that you're looking for ways to support your students to make innovations, learn how to collaborate, and have success in the changing world. I'd like to propose that we take a tinkering approach to that goal, which means engaging learners in playful, hands-on activities and learning together. It means putting an emphasis on agility and creativity. But before introducing myself and how I got involved with this type of work, I'd like to highlight one of my favorite tinkering projects. In this workshop, learners dissect electromechanical stuffed animals, usually ones that sing and dance to annoying music. These used toys can often be found in thrift stores, garage sales for about $1 a piece, but inside is an entire electronics kit. We invite learners of all ages to closely observe, take notes about what they imagine to be inside, and then carefully dissect the toy while trying to keep it working as long as possible. Oftentimes, we use the parts to build something new.
Build up all a new vocabulary.
I'd like to share a video of a teacher who participated in this workshop and gave a brilliant and brief assessment of her experience in the activity.
Build up all a new vocabulary. So we're talking about capacitors, resistors, DC motors, transistors, the gears, and describing the movement and trying to see how everything. I never thought all this was in this little toy. It was for me, it was very inspiring.
So she talks about her growing science and engineering vocabulary and how it has a new meaning for her, the process that she went through, and then the emotions that she felt along the way. These moments where participants describe their learning process is what makes me excited to keep coming back to these explorations again and again. Today, I'll be sharing some of my experience developing and sharing these types of workshops all around the world in formal and informal education settings, and offering some suggestions and starting points for you to begin experimenting with tinkering in your classroom. But first, a little bit about myself. I think for me, this process started because I was bad at science in school. Throughout my formal education, I was discouraged by having to memorize facts that were disconnected from real life, having to fill out inflexible lab reports with confusing requirements, and an emphasis on always finding either a right or a wrong answer. Somehow, after graduating from university without taking a single science course, I got a part-time job working at a science center called the Exploratorium in San Francisco, California. Through interactions with master teachers, experience building exhibits, and plenty of unusual trainings and workshops, I started to become more interested in physics, biology, and math as I learned that they were connected to art, stories, play, and construction. I spent about 10 years at the Exploratorium helping to start a workshop in the museum floor called the Tinkering Studio. And then about 4 years ago, I began my own studio called Wonderful Idea Company, where I could have a bit more freedom and chance to collaborate with different organizations all around the world to continue these explorations that we started about 15 years ago. Back at that time, we began by creating playful, inventive experiences and collaborating with other educators like Gaver Tolley's adventurous summer programs. Through these interactions, the term tinkering began to gain more attention as a new type of educational philosophy, especially in relation to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Of course, this type of learner-centric pedagogy is not new. The experiments are built on a constructionist philosophy of educators like Jean Piaget, Seymour Papert, Eleanor Duckworth, and Edith Ackerman, and many more thinkers over the last 100 years or so. And even before that, maybe even from the beginning of time, and in many cultures around the world, people have been learning through doing, playing, and experimenting. But in the early years of the 21st century, with a new attention on Make Magazine, Maker Faire, with the rise of more accessible digital technology and a renewed emphasis on STEM programs in schools, we had the chance to develop our own perspective on these types of activities. As a way to investigate the type of learning that happens, we led learners in projects like building pathways for marbles to travel down a pegboard wall, testing flying machines built out of recycled materials on a column of air, and constructing robots with simple circuits that made intricate patterns on the table. These direct experiences with activities allowed us to develop some core principles and create a definition of tinkering as a learning approach. We define tinkering as an approach to learning that values both the students and the educators' own curiosity, ideas, and experiments as the driving process towards real understanding. I'm convinced that the way to connect and engage with students in today's world isn't by teaching the same way that we always have, but by trying new things and experimenting ourselves. I don't think that tinkering is the only way to learn or even the best way to learn everything. But I have noticed that the joy, frustration, and curiosity that tinkering supports is often missing in both informal and formal education settings. So a little bit more about tinkering as an approach to learning. It's based on the idea of constructionism, or the idea that learners make connections and build their own knowledge based on past experiences, personal connections, people and things that they see in the world around them. And that this process of learning is messy, and it must take into account the learner's own way of looking at things, challenging past assumptions, and integrating new information. We think that tinkering is based on working with real materials and making physical prototypes. We believe that we learn better when we have a tangible artifact that we can hold in our hands that represents the process of learning. Having this physical prototype allows us to see what happens if things go wrong. It gives us something to look at when we share with teachers or our peers, and it allows us to get direct feedback from the materials to see if things are working the way we expect. Tinkering works best when it combines elements of art, science, and technology, because this combination produces new and unusual ideas. Learners can explore a subject that they are not confident about because the activity seems unusual or unique. And finally, tinkering always has a component of play and playfulness. Of course, this is because it's fun to be in a playful environment, but I also believe that the learning that happens in these playful environments is stronger and stickier, because through play, we can take risks, try new things, and collaborate with others to go beyond our current understanding. In a flow state brought on by play, you feel like you belong. And having the students feel like they belong in the subject or the classroom is a prerequisite for them to succeed in a learning environment. We found that academic research and publications have confirmed what we see about the outcomes of making and tinkering projects in museums and classrooms. And they provide evidence that tinkering is a way for learners to develop confidence, prepare for deeper learning, and build connections between personal experiences and STEAM subjects. Over the years, I've had the chance to work with learners in a wide variety of settings, from museums to classrooms, community centers, libraries, and festivals. And I've also had the chance to travel to various locations around the world, testing out playful, engaging activities with high school students in Saudi Arabia, with Buddhist monks in exile in northern India, and with school teachers in Northwest Arkansas. And in all of these settings, I found that this approach to learning works all over the world. It's not easy, but if you want to do it, it's possible in any setting to make the learning experience more tinkerable, and in the process, give learners and yourselves more opportunities to engage with science, engineering, technology, math, and many other subjects in ways that allow them to see personal connections and build confidence in their own abilities. In the second half of the talk, I'd like to share just a few ways to get started and some best practices for making and tinkering, because you might look at some of these pictures that I'm showing and say, that looks like fun and I want to try. You maybe can see, as I do, the excitement, engagement, concentration, and even frustration on the faces of the learners, and associate that with real, concrete, long-lasting learning. But maybe there are also specific challenges that you see in providing these experiences for your students. Maybe there's not enough time in the day. Maybe you have to follow a strict curriculum. Maybe you have learned to teach in a specific way, and this seems like too much of a change. These real and perceived challenges are common all over the world, but many educators have started slow, begun to add a tinkering approach to their learning toolbox, and started a process of discovery and co-learning. I have a lot of experience with these activities, but I'm not an expert in education in Turkey, in your settings, in your classrooms, with your students or your communities. So take these suggestions just as a starting point and an inspiration for you to find your own way and style. I'd like to start with a quote by Eleanor Duckworth, who said, "The important thing in any learning is to be able to use it, to go beyond it, in the direction of still further learning and activity." So taking that into account, my first suggestion would be to reframe the learning goals in the classroom. I'm not suggesting that we abandon rigorous expectations or goals for our students, but instead, I imagine a world where we broaden the traditional content-based goals and take into account both the scientific and artistic practice, as well as the socio-emotional development of our learners into account. These goals may be a bit harder to evaluate, but provide for a much wider and deeper form of assessment. As an example, I'd like to look at marble machines, an activity where learners build a track for a marble to travel down a pegboard wall as slowly as possible. I'm confident that in this activity, there are many content-based learning goals that we can identify. I'm confident that every learner starts to get a feel for friction, speed and velocity, slope and angle, even if they don't know how to connect the words to what they notice on their boards. All of the learners work with structural engineering and material science as they construct their machines. But there's also a scientific or artistic process that we can look at as well. Our students will make predictions, closely observe what happens, test ideas, troubleshoot problems, identify sensible next steps, and assess possibilities for adapting when the marble machine doesn't work according to plan. In this combination of process and content, it also leads to socio-emotional learning, where students discover that they can work independently, that they are proud of what they did, and they are curious about the next steps, as this teacher shows with her chair-based marble machine.
Oh, that's neat.
So to go back to the Eleanor Duckworth quote, I think that incorporating the practices and techniques, as well as the socio-emotional aspects of learning in a tinkering environment, is what makes it possible for students to apply what they've learned and be curious to know more. In our current world of online search engines, instant sharing on social media, and a constantly changing environment, education is becoming less about what you know and more about the skills and practices that you can use to collaborate, make new discoveries, and make connections between existing knowledge. So another quote that we can use to frame a suggestion of how to get started with tinkering is Jasper Johns, who said, do something to that, and then do something to that. So I suggest that we can iterate on a classroom experience and make subtle shifts in our practice as educators. In this way, we don't have to reinvent the wheel and completely change our practice, but instead we can look at tinkering as just another tool we can use as educators. It may take a while to find a rhythm, but this will be a worthwhile experience for you and your students. We can take a look at an activity called light play as an example of how subtle shifts and iteration can make a project more tinkerable. The inspirations for this experience started with a classic science demonstration that guides students to engage in a process of inquiry by listening to a teacher explain the properties of physics and optics. To make these lessons about light and shadow more accessible, one thing we can do without changing anything else about our approach is using common everyday materials. Just this small step invites students to make connections with the real world and imagine how they might continue investigating these phenomena on their own. Another slightly larger change might be having some time where you can rearrange the environment in the classroom. So instead of the students always sitting in rows and listening to the teachers, they can move around, grab materials, and try things out for themselves. As you think about creating opportunities for different learning environments, think about ways that students can collaborate and share their works with each other. Another shift that you can make in the activity is creating ways for learners to collaborate with each other by building something larger than themselves. In light play, this can look like a large-scale wall filled with kinetic sculptures, each made by a different student or pair of students. Oftentimes, we think that competition in a science fair or a robotics showdown is the only way to motivate students. But I've found that creating collaborative and hard challenges with an element of art and aesthetics can provide that same spark without discouraging many students who might take the concept of winners and losers too seriously and work that into their own self-assessment. This is not just about a distinction between what is a tinkering activity and not a tinkering activity, but a discussion of how to make things more tinkerable. It takes time and iteration, but I'll bet that each of you can find one thing in your classroom and make it a bit more focused on the learner's own ideas, a bit more playful, or a bit more collaborative. As well, luckily, there are many projects and activities ideas that we share on our website at Wonderful Idea Co. You can find on the Tinkering Studio blog, Instructables, Make Magazine, and social media. Many of these projects are open source and can be adapted for you to meet your own context. So to take something that you like and are interested in, you can use that as a jumping off point. You don't have to know all the answers, but just be willing to get lost for a bit with the students as you investigate a new problem area. You can start sharing, remixing, borrowing, and collaborating with a global or local group of educators. So to end the presentation, I'd like to share one more quote from John Holt, who said, "Not many years ago, I began to play the cello. Most people would say that what I am doing is learning to play the cello. But these words carry into our minds the strange idea that there exists two very different processes. One, learning to play the cello, and two, playing the cello. They imply that I will do the first until I have completed it, at which point I will stop the first process and begin the second. In short, I will go on learning to play until I have learned to play, and then I will begin to play." Of course, this is nonsense. There are not two processes, but one. We learn to do something by doing it. There is no other way. So this applies not just for the students, but also for ourselves. Just as the students don't have to learn structural engineering concepts to build a marble machine before building it, or learn all the physical properties of light before making a beautiful kinetic sculpture, we as educators don't need to learn how to tinker with our students and then put these principles into action. We can learn by trying, experimenting, and prototyping ourselves. So if this style of education is interesting to you and your students, I suggest that we start by redefining our learning goals, going slow and making small changes, and borrowing and learning from a global community of tinkerers. But maybe most importantly is that you embrace a tinkering mindset in yourself. Roll up your sleeves and learn how to teach in this style by giving it a try. In this process, we can create something larger than ourselves, our classrooms, our communities, and the world. We can create opportunities for playful, meaningful, innovative, and transformative experiences. So some of us can start this at a workshop on Tuesday, where we'll get the chance to try out a digital tinkering experience and reflect together about what it feels like to be a learner in the activity and how we can take that experience and apply it to our students. And for everyone else, I just wanted to say thanks so much for giving me a few minutes to share about my experience tinkering around the world. I'll stop sharing my screen, but Yeah, thanks so much. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the conference. I don't know, Devrim, if there's time for some questions, but
I've checked up, actually. I've checked out the question and answer section. There is a lot of requests, like accessing the PowerPoint afterwards. They shouldn't worry about it. It's going to be up on our forum blog right after this forum. Don't worry about it. Ryan, thank you very much for this lively, energetic, encouraging presentation. It's been very refreshing for me personally. And I really love the marble machine. And I'm really hoping that we're going to get some of those for TEGEV locations as well, TEGEV learning units. And yes, like Ryan said, we have a lovely workshop, and it's called art. What was it?
I think it's called Digital Art
in the Wild. Yes, Digital Art in the Wild. Please don't miss it. And I don't know how many people Ryan can take up to, but we'll see. We'll see. Maybe it could be your biggest workshop, online workshop. We'll see. Do you think you can do that, Ryan, if the number goes up to hundreds?
Yes, I hope that in the workshop, we'll have a chance to try an activity, but I also hope that we can have a discussion with each other. So
okay.
As long as you can share, like the previous presenter talked about, peer-to-peer learning, I think that's the best part of that workshop. So
yes. Thank you so much, Ryan. This is so valuable for us, and everybody has been fascinated. It's outstanding, and I'll see you later. Thank you.
And please keep in touch. And I'm always active on social media, by email. I'd love to hear from some of you. So thanks so much.
And Ryan has already been on our forum blog for over a year now, because we started off the preparations a year ago, and we put him up and the wonderful Idea Company website on our forum blog for a long time. Maybe some people have already become accustomed to it. Okay, thank you so much, Ryan.
Bye. Thank you.